radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. From 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Fission radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear. Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. Thank you for joining us. Today is February 26, 2018. It's 8 o'clock in the morning here in Eugene, Oregon, and it is the usual gray until May. So thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. Today we have back with us he's not actually a YouTuber. He does live stream on YouTube, but he live streams on Facebook Live every single morning, Gerard Kenyatte Hay, and he has quite a following. He's pretty well known, I guess, on the YouTube and Facebook scene, and he was recommended to me. He's been on our show before. He was recommended by Billy Johnston, one of my friends and followers, that I should be talking to this guy. And based on our last conversation, I'd say Billy was right. So thanks for joining us, Gerard. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me again. That was a phenomenal introduction. I'm not sure I'm all that popular, but I got a lot of good friends.
You do, and you're active every single day. You do a live stream on Facebook, don't you, practically every morning?
Yeah, pretty much every morning. It's, for me, when
do you start? What's your time? What's your time that you start every day?
Well, usually around 9 o'clock Eastern Standard, we'll start a stream. It depends on really the topics in the news. Each morning I get up, Lonnie, and I kind of look at what's going on and try to process it and deliver it in a format that I think common sense, more moderate focus folks can process. And so I think a lot of the stuff that comes in through the news, it's problematic, it's divisive, it's talking point focused. And as you know, I do my best, not always get it, but I do my best to try to process what we, from a human rights perspective, we need to pay more attention to, as opposed to just the side effects, which is what the mainstream media tends to talk about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, about those talking points, I actually watch all three stations, Fox, MSNBC, and what's the other one? CNN. And you can actually identify the talking points. I click on, as soon as they say their little clip of whatever it is, news topic they're talking about, you click onto the other station and guarantee the other person is saying almost the identical words. Same thing on Fox. That's how you know those are talking points, because everybody babbles the same words. It's not like there's an independent thought on any of them. And it's really shocking, actually, to be honest. It's kind of like, at what point do they think we're not going to get it, right? And so then they try really hard to make it not look like talking points, right? Yeah. So well,
But they're doing a great job. Because if you live in a media ghetto and you just watch one of them, your perspective comes across the board, so you can see it very clearly. But if you just pay attention to CNN, or you're just watching Fox, or you're just watching one of them, or even just American news, it's very hard to spot where they're saying the exact same things, or even when it's always, one opposite and one polar opposite here, the other polar opposite there, and there's no news. It's just commentary and partial news, and it's a very scary time we live in.
Well, I think that's really one of the worst parts, and that's kind of my hesitation. That's why I like to interview people that are activists and people actually engaged in making the process change, because we can have, you and I are basically internet pundits. We're sitting here talking to each other about our ideas, right? But it's the same thing with these mainstream. We've sort of taken that away from the mainstream, but all day long, that's all we hear is punditry. Even that word punditry, when did we get into having pundits on the news? Like the news when I grew up was Walter Cronkite in a half an hour news segment telling us boom, 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 showing us pictures of soldiers dying in Vietnam. Right? So those things changed the world. That's what changed the world. Now what they do is they get on and make an effort not to report the things that are changing the world. Right? Like we did not hear. Do you know that the United States has set a date to change its embassy to Jerusalem on May 30th? And to celebrate the anniversary of Israel's 70th anniversary? Have you heard that? Have we heard on mainstream news that the Israelis have cut off all electricity except for 2 to 3 hours a day in the Gaza Strip? Have not heard that.
No. Well, it's not. The truth isn't profitable, not from a financial perspective. The truth is profitable when you want people to go along with the narrative based on an identity, on partial information. And then the scary part is, so then after this descends and it becomes World War III, then it's, oops, how did we do that? Oh, my goodness, that was just a mistake. We didn't mean to do it. There's no profitability in the truth. And so I was talking to a journalist friend of mine, or an ex-journalist friend, and her perspective was that when the news cycle shrank to such a point where they couldn't do a lot of fact-checking, that's when it started leaning towards punditry and more commentary than truth. And
what do you mean when it shrank and they couldn't do the back legs? You mean they couldn't get their information on the airwaves?
Well, right. There wasn't enough time. So as an example, my background's in software engineering. And so it's like with software. Why do we have version Windows, update after update after update after they release the initial one? It's because they never fully test and develop the initial one. They have to get it out because the software cycle is so fast now. They release the software and they test it in the general public. So that's my software example too. When the news cycle is so short, you don't have 48 hours to vet all of the facts. And so they've got to get it out within hours. And so to do minimum fact checking and getting out. And so her perspective was, this is when the real journalists started walking away from the media because, they were putting their reputations and their integrity out there on stories that weren't fully vetted and fully fact checked. And so I think we're seeing the same example now in the mainstream media where they're rushing to get things out because they got to be the first to get it out. They got to talk about it. They got to get, the likes, the shares, the advertising dollar. But then, and then they'll do a retraction later, or someone else will come out with their spin on the other side. But this is what scared the real journalists the Walter Cronkites, who just want to give the facts and the news, and it scares them out because now it's not facts and news, it's entertainment. Who can get?
Well, look what happened to Dan Rather. He lost his career.
Exactly.
Keith Olbermann lost his career because he didn't stick up for the lies of the Iraq War.
Exactly. So, it's entertainment.
And they know exactly. Same thing like Cynthia McKinney. I don't know if you know who she is.
Yes.
But, she was in Congress. And do you know, because she opposed the war, every day she went into the Congress, they gave her a full search?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, that is just a form of harassment. And then the GOP sent in millions of dollars into her little tiny Texas district to just eliminate her political career, politically.
Oh yeah. Well, Cynthia was doing crazy stuff, Lonnie. She was willing to go in and work with the Klan in her district. She was going in and listening to people who had gripes that drove them to extremes, and she actually was getting votes. She was breaking down. She did the taboo, Lonnie. She actually crossed the lines and identified the other people as being human and started bringing them back to a moderate position.
Right.
That is, you can't do that. You can do anything you like, but you cannot go across lines. And
well, I think the biggest line you can't cross is be anti-Israel. Let's just put that right out there. That was one of the things that shocked me when I was listening to her at one of her speeches. I follow her, and she basically said, when things got really hard for her, she said within 2 weeks she was rolled into some congressional office and said, you're required to give a pledge to support Israel. To support Israel, no matter what. You have to support Israel. And she wouldn't do it. Right. Because this is really a terrorist state. Let's just be clear. It's not a true state. It's not independent of the industrial military complex. It is, in my view, it is an arm of the industrial military complex. She would not do it. And that's when things got hard for her. That's when they had a target on her back. That's why you will not see a single congressperson, a single senator stand up and say, I don't really like what Israel's doing. Thanks, but no, we're not going to support $1 million a day to Israel. We're just not going to do it,
Well, it's and that, as horrible as it is a great thing in terms of it's making obvious that people with critical thought, love in their heart, and really can see how both parties are complicit, and they take money from similar sources. And if those sources, not just Israel, but pharmaceutical, the private prisons, military industrial complex, whoever they take money from, they will not turn their back on. And I think that's the only reason I find hope today. And I think the tide is slowly starting to turn, because moderate people are actually starting to see there is almost no difference between the two parties, especially when it comes to Israel. My heart was moved the other day, and this is where live streaming is so important. There was a broadcast, and I forgot the brother's name, but he was in the Gaza Strip, and he was there, and he was explaining the details. We don't have power. They shut off the running water. Our kids go to sleep by candlelight. It is a complete oppression of a people, and they did this. And my background, Lonnie, I'm a Christian. I say it all the time. I don't know that I believe everything that conservatives believe, but, a lot of my conservative friends, we talk a lot about. But if you're doing everything against what Christ taught, you are stealing. It says, thou shalt not steal. Israel is about stealing land from the Palestinians, which is the land where Jesus grew up anyway to begin with. And two, you're doing it murdering people. Thou shalt not murder. If your leaders in your church, your conservative group, your political party, if they say that they are Christian and they're murdering and looting land, that is not your position. That if you believe these things that this God taught, because I think, Lonnie, they rope a lot of Christians and say we got to support the chosen people. If you believe what your Christ taught, you are not standing on the ground of murderers who are stealing land. It is a land grab. That's exactly what's happening. But you know what? I appreciate there are a lot of people in Israel who are speaking up too.
True.
And I think that's where the tide is starting to change. You have a lot of folks in the Jewish religion who are coming forward and saying, this is not a Jewish thing. This has nothing to do with Jews. This is about the Zionists. This is a political thing. Don't try to grab our religion like Al-Qaeda does or ISIS does or Westboro Baptist Church. So I'm sorry, I get to ranting. I'm sorry, I get excited sometimes. But we have to have some real common sense approaches and critical thought, or we get roped into these bad spots.
Well, Christians for a long time have you murder, death, kill. Like they came into this nation, they took over the lands, they murdered, they genocided this. And this is why it's not that, this is why they can turn their backs on whatever it is that Israel's doing today. Because frankly, it's the reason why I don't identify as being a Christian. To be really 100%, because whatever it is they're saying that Christianity is, it's not real. There has been no apology for destroying the nations of this continent, for still keeping the First Nations, for breaking every single treaty, from harming. I mean, look what's going on, not in the past. Let's just talk about right now, right today. The women on the reservations are being abducted and raped and turned back into their, reservations. Murder, death, kill of the people running the programs that are intimidating the First Nations. So this whole concept of we're a law-abiding nation, Christian nation, is an absurd fallacy. So, we can leave all that aside. We can leave the Israel thing aside, because what we have to do is look at our own country, what's going on here. And that's, you and I, when we were asking, what do we want to talk about? And you said, maybe, how do we get it back, right? Yeah. So I have suggested this many times. People need to get actively engaged in community rights, because the way our Constitution is written, corporations actually right now, this is why the Supreme Court took the position it did towards corporations and called them people, because our Constitution gives them rights over you and me, unless we as a group get our state constitution to amend our community rights and give us equal footing with corporations. Yes. So, and CELDEF, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, they have a whole organization that if your community wants to start working towards community rights, you can contact them and they'll help you get it started. But it is a grassroots thing where you have to go knock on doors. We did that here in Lane County. We're going to have a ballot coming up in the new year. We're going to be on the ballot. It did get enough signatures. But the fight still goes on because it's on the ballot. There's going to be a lot of people who are against it, the corporations who are saying, this isn't going to give you the rights. It's going to keep us from advancing as a community, because a few people can keep us from having our rights exercised. Right.
And that's where the conversation has to go. And I think we have to spend time talking about, well, what are the next steps? Like a lot of people are starting to get that, the kids in Gaza and the kids, the Palestinians and the kids in the Congo, the kids in Appalachia and
how about the kids in Chicago? How about the kids in Louisiana and Mississippi?
All of these kids have the same problem. They all have the same boot on their necks, these kids. And so this is why I don't think it's a political discussion anymore. This is about human rights. This is about human rights to life. And that power was lost at the community level. So I'm with you 1,000%. And there are a lot of different approaches to do that. There are a lot of different organizations that are talking about community rights. And so in terms of us bringing back and pulling back our government, which is who I target the most, and it's not that they're the bad guys, it's that they were bought. And I'm glad you put corporation out there. If we can accept that we don't have a government, the people in the United States absolutely have no government because we allowed Wall Street corporations to buy them. Now, I don't see a great cabal and I don't see one bad guy, but I see conglomerates of corporations and industries that own interest. And so now Democrats and Republicans can't do different things if they want to. Our government lost the ability to make their own decisions. And so how do we take that back? First, it begins at the community level, right? National security, power, everything begins with the family, the community, the township, the state, and the state that regulates the federal government. And so I think community organizing, it builds up into what a corporation I'll plug, or a company I'll plug, the 10th Amendment Center. So I like to follow them. And what they talk about is the 10th Amendment and nullification. And so the example I'll give with that is, if we're organized at the community level and we know what's wrong in our communities and we know what's wrong in our state and we know it's the same thing that's wrong in the world, people can look at, well, what was a successful way? What was a successful movement in restraining this federal government that ignores the Constitution? And the Nullify movement is that, right? If you look at medical cannabis, you have cannabis, which is illegal at the federal level, Schedule I, completely unconstitutional, along with everybody they threw in prison who shouldn't be in prison from it, and the millions of people who died because they made an unconstitutional law to take away natural medicine. So now you have people who are actually growing. They nullified the federal law and they're growing medical cannabis in their own states because the state nullified the federal Schedule I-ing of cannabis, and it was successful. And so dispensaries open all up. And so for me, I don't like experiments. I like to put my energy in places where things work. The 10th Amendment Center, they have a website. If there is a law that is unconstitutional, they'll get behind you. They'll help you write the legislation to put in front of your community to actually modify, to make a law within your state to nullify something unconstitutional the federal government's doing. So I think that is our way to getting the federal government restrained and back under the authority of the American people and the Constitution, which will free up brothers and sisters in the Congo, in Israel, in
I just pulled up their website. I can appreciate that, except that unless we get behind community rights, we can chase after them and have them nullify all these laws. But if you get in front of them and we get our community rights first, like, they do not have the right to do certain things when you prevent them. The city of Newport here in Oregon, where they were the first city in Oregon to actually get their community rights, they to stop the aerial spraying because it's a kind of a farm area around there. They actually passed a law that said you cannot do aerial spraying within 15, 25 miles of Newport. So now they have actually stopped aerial spraying, which prevents a lot of other things. So what happens, because this community has passed its community rights, and in Oregon, we are lucky because Oregon actually has a clause in its constitution that says we have a right to clean, healthy living. Most states don't have that clause, so you have to fight for that to get that inserted into your constitution, right? But because it was already in our constitution, all they had to do was assert their community rights based on their right to a healthy living. So now they've been able to, based on their community rights, to keep a lot of polluters out of their community, which is really where we need to go as communities. Is we've been behind we've been really behind the eight ball. They've been really pushing us around for 200 years because we didn't really understand that corporations' rights superseded our own rights. Until we get our community rights enforced, and on the books, we're going to be chasing them and talking about nullification till forever. And frankly, the reason I really believe that part of the reason why corporations are pushing back against these rights so hard is because they know that that's where the power lies, is in the local people locally. It is your local, anybody who's gotten involved in a local city council understands how easy it is to get corrupt. Power corrupts in every little town, every little city. I mean, even here in Eugene, we have a city manager who basically we end up fighting him all the time. He spends money wherever he wants, not on the things that have been passed by the city council. And in fact, the laws here in Eugene are that if you want to review where the money's being spent as a city councilor, I think you have to get three or four city councilors or a majority of the city councilors to say, we want to see where the money's being spent.
Yeah, that actually gets to the point of all of our government secrets and our local secrets and having secrets. So we're saying the same thing. And I totally agree with you. You can't nullify at the state level until you're organized at the community level. Cannabis was lucky. They lucked up because it was something that the majority accidentally agreed on. but you have to organize at the community level, and that'll give, people the power to even approach anything.
Well, cannabis is still under pursuit. I mean, we have Jeff Sessions who's really going after it for real. Yeah. Cory Booker has a proposal to hit the floor of the Senate to make cannabis legal, right? In all 50 states, to make it legal at the federal level. How much pushback do you think is getting paid to those other senators to block that? A lot by the pharmaceutical industries.
Yeah,
Let's just be really clear.
Yeah, Lonnie, don't get me started on Cory Booker and his pharmaceutical ties. I'm scared to death about anything that brother says. Anti. And so if he's promoting cannabis, I'm a little worried about that. But the start is what you said. The start is at the community level, and a couple other great examples. So Lockheed Martin, did you know Lockheed Martin has contracts with your stoplight developers and makers for the cameras? Yeah. And what was happening, and I think this was Ohio. I looked this up the other day and I couldn't believe it. But so they were shortening the yellow lights, because when you shorten the yellow light, it means you could give away more tickets. And so the cameras were taking pictures and they were giving away tickets. And at the community level, they organized, they found out what was going on, and they refuted they refuted that they even owned that they had to pay those tickets, and it came out that Lockheed had the ability, and I guess they were handing it on at the local level, to reduce the yellow light time. So not did they step in and didn't have to pay the tickets. And I don't want to say it's about tickets. It's not. For me, it's about human life, right? Think about how many car accidents actually occur because you shift the yellow light because this township wants to make a little more money. So that was another successful step in at the community level. Another great one I love, which was recently, was and I don't know if it was in California. I forgot if it was LA or San Francisco, but there was that drone. There was a robotics automation company that came in with a robot and said that they have the ability to chase homeless people out of certain areas with automation. What? And they got together at the community level and they said, no, you're not going to be chasing homeless people out of the city. And I don't have details on what they were doing, but you can look it up. But at the community level, when people come together on some really basic human right type topics, then there's nothing to fight about. So that's why I'm agreeing with you that I love nullification, and nullification is more on the state level and fighting the federal government, but you'll never get to the state level if you don't have communities that are organized and agree on what needs to change. We got to take out the division and take out the fights, for a while, and that's how they get unconstitutional law. They get people fighting. So if we're not secure at the community level, they'll always destroy it at the state or even the federal level. So I'm totally in agreement with you. I'm totally right. But people have to stop viewing it as politics. None of this is politics. This is human rights. And if we can
this is where I disagree with you. Everything is politics. Everything is politics. It is human rights, but politics is human rights. Because politics defines how much human rights we are actually able to assert and have in our country. It is a political issue. People go, well, I hate politics. Well, one of the things we really have to adjust to as adults is that in a society where we espouse to be free and we want to have our, quote, freedom, is we have a responsibility to politically and actively engage, because it's politics that define our freedoms. So we can't just say, well, I don't want to talk about politics, because it's all politics. I had a friend of mine who didn't want to talk to me anymore because I can't help but talk about radioactivity and the nonstop nuclear pollution that's coming out of Fukushima and Hanford. That's politics. Those companies up there, that is politics. It's the same corporations that are running those things that are also doing the chemical cleanups, that are also spreading the chemicals. I mean, it's not just one thing or another, but how do they get it? Through a political process where our elected officials give CH2M Health billions of dollars to protect us. And what do? They do nothing. They do the least amount, and they keep, even their name, CH2M Hill. Who can remember that name? They create a corporate name that nobody can remember, right?
And then they changed their name, like
Right.
Bayer bought Monsanto, and they're shifting that name. But so
Bayer bought Monsanto?
yeah, you didn't hear about that?
No.
That was
Wow.
that how was it? Was it $2 billion or whatever it was? And this goes back to pre-election and whether or not I think
Wow.
Trump is going to allow that merger or that acquisition to occur. So yeah, and then they talked about rebranding. So the whole Monsanto name that's going to go away.
Monsanto's going to go away, and it's going to be Bayer aspirin, good for your kids.
It'll be something like Love GMO Chemical something. It'll be something pretty and nice to make you think it's beautiful.
I've gotten into arguments with people on Hatebook about GMOs, how good GMOs are, how denying GMOs are, detrimental to our future, that we absolutely have to have GMOs.
Yeah, but that's an easy one, though. That is a very easy discussion to have with people. I don't, every now and then I'll talk to someone who's grown them, like a corn farmer or someone, and I just pose it in a very simple way, right? Our bodies are designed to work a certain way, and they've been designed to work that way on the same compounds, microbiology, that have been on this planet for 1 billion years. A genetically modified organism, while down the road, when they actually figure out what they're doing, it might actually save the world. So I'm not anti-GMO. What I'm anti is experimenting on the human body. So they're mixing together things, DNA from jellyfish, DNA from animals that make a whole different set of compounds, and we don't know what will actually get created when you put the two together. You're basically making an alien. You're making an alien. It might look delicious like an apple, but it doesn't decay like an apple. Well, I think that's the Arctic apple. And so the very basic, simple discussion on human health is, if you're putting something in your body doesn't recognize, you might have problems. And so with GMO, they're not engineering anything. It's just hacking. They're taking things, they're throwing them together. No one knows the long-term effects. It might be a wonderful thing. People might fly, grow wings, and get stronger. But
the reality is they do know a lot of those effects. That statement that they don't know, they do know. They do know it's harmful. They do know it causes serious genetic defects down the line. We've had plenty of history. It's like saying, with nuclear, we don't know the real harm that nuclear is going to cause. Yes, we actually really, really do. We do know that these things are detrimental to human life and actually, frankly, to all life on our planet. The prime conversation of this, though, Gerard, is that you get engaged with people who think that they can play God and that we have a right as humans, because God gave us dominion over the earth, that we can do whatever we want. And if we need to change the human dynamic, that's our God-given right. If we need to change every species on this planet, if we destroy, which we have been doing, destroying the entire planet, that's our God-given. That's the whole conversation between anthropomorphic posture and enviromorphic posture. Like, do we adhere to how the earth was created and we adhere to that? Or do we dive in and say that humans have a right to destroy everything? And at this point, the people with all the money are the anthropomorphic people who have all these big corporations who are telling you, if you get cancer, go get radiation treatment. And in fact, you probably will get cancer, so nothing to worry about it, because cancer is, the new flu. So don't worry about it.
Yeah, well, I want to jump in there. So the point is, but it's not humans that are doing it. It's corporations. And this is
humans are corporations. Let's just be clear. Let's untie that bow, because corporations don't run themselves. There are human beings running corporations, making these decisions not to care about human life. Right. There are P counters who make their living working for these corporations, saying, well, we've calculated that 155 people are going to die out of the million, and it's going to cost the corporation $26 million, but you're going to make $182 billion profit, so it's worth the death of those few people.
Yeah. So when I say that, what I'm saying, though, is that it is a corporate model that we're fighting. We have a corporate model that's based on profit. In fact, with the SEC, right, it's illegal for these corporations to not maximize the profit. And so the people... Well,
that's actually not true if they put it in their corporate charter that they don't have to make profit their number one motive.
Oh, well, who's going to do that?
I did.
Oh, no, but see, you love.
In my corporation, that's what I did. I wrote it into my corporate charter.
Right. And it's that guarantee that you never become a massive mega monopoly corporation. But so what I'm saying is it gets back to what you said. It's corporations versus community rights. It's corporations versus self-determination. And so when corporate profit makes all the decisions, then we have no rights. We have no ability to say you can't murder people for profit. And that's exactly where we are, which takes you right back to your discussion about community. If we don't organize at the community level and say this stuff you shouldn't be doing, you shouldn't be, planting GMOs in our community, you shouldn't be spraying for mosquitoes in our community, Zika's a lie, it's a hoax, if we don't actually do that, then this corporate greed model of maximizing profit, taking human rights and taking human life, that will be our future. And I think people really need to process, we're walking into a future where corporate greed and profit will determine where human life goes. There's a commercial on TV last night, Lonnie, I saw for Microsoft AI. I couldn't believe it. I was watching a commercial. It looked all empowering. They had good music in the background, the kids on computers, and the guy was real professional. And they were talking about empower yourself with what the world can become. And at the end of it, they flashed Microsoft AI. And like, well, wait a minute. That's not empowering. But they put these things in packages. We think that the world is going in a great direction. But empowering corporations to determine what happens to the planet Earth is only going to end in one way.
Well, it seems to be ending in one way anyways. I mean, Guy McPherson says we have no later than, 25, 30 years on this planet. Within 25 years, the water's going to be so polluted, we're all going to die of dehydration. So, I mean, we got to get some pretty urgent solutions going on right now. I mean, the corporations basically are stifling solutions from being discovered or made public. There are solutions, right? We do have solutions. But part of that is really the agenda of a few people who believe that they have, what we're really dealing with in lots of ways is like a scenario where it's Caligula on Balco, right? Like they actually believe that they are messengers of God. You know what I mean? That they have the right to do these things.
Absolutely.
That those of us, and you can hear it in the rhetoric, and it's actually very, I think it's part of why the mental illness that we have, this last shooting spree that we had, the first thing they said is we have mental illness, but that's not the cause of, that's not the root cause of what happens here, frankly, is the destruction of the family. Let's just be clear. I mean, when you get down to the root cause, but we don't have to just deal with the root cause. We have to deal with the endings, the tailings of it. Fukushima's coming up. It's going to be a 7-year mark where we have had nonstop lies out of the nuclear industry. And now the IAEA's recommendation to TEPCO is to dump those tanks in the Pacific Ocean. That's their recommendation.
Yeah.
That's their solution.
And that's why I push to the human rights perspective. Like I get, politics is what caused it, and politics is how you fix it. So you can't get away from the word politics. But the actual occurrence that you're allowing nuclear radiation to rain down on children, to be in the food that people are eating, to not produce those statistics, to warn people, to me, that is a human rights violation, right? It's a human rights violation to starve a population in Yemen. It's a human rights violation to do all of it, to deny a veteran their ability to get natural medicine. It's a human rights violation. And so I like to talk about it in that terms, because the only way it seems that you get Americans involved in things sometimes is you actually have to mention the kids. And if you're harming children, the American population comes together. In terms of that shooting, the same exact thing. And I know exactly where you're going, which is, the debate comes, the problem happens, they make the debate emotional, one group jumps on one side for gun control, yelling at another group that actually wasn't there, and they want to keep their guns, and then legislation passes, and we wait till it happens again. And it always happens again because it happens.
No, the key is here, no legislation passes. Right. That's the key here. Or no legislation passes.
They make it emotional, and it comes to some sort of end where they get minimal legislation that either doesn't work, or they get something passed, or nothing passes. But the point is, it always happens again because no one stops and says what actually happened. Where did this child come from? Who raised this child? Were there any warning signs? Did they tell the FBI 20 times that this child has some issues? This child was crying out for help, and I'm not making excuses for him. I'm just putting together a realistic story that in America we don't care about children because...
No, it's not just that. I hate to say this, but for me, and I'm going to say it straight up, like I personally don't believe that AR-15s and assault weapons ought to be used outside of the military. I believe in a complete ban of the assault weapons to civilian use. But beyond that, I think that the reason that the FBI didn't pay attention to these warnings because it was a white person. It was a white person. So there's an underlying bias towards, I mean, really at a fundamental level, it gets down to that they didn't really pay attention to it because they figured it wasn't that big of a risk, just some. Now, if that guy had been a Mexican, or if he had been a Muslim, or if he had been a black person, I guarantee you they would have paid attention a lot more. They wouldn't have gone out to his house 30 times and not taken him to jail. They would have not made some difference. So when we unpeel the onion beyond the fact that these types of weapons ought not to be available to civilian use, at least not immediately. And the ban, like I find it ironic that the CPAC this weekend was a gun-free zone. They had gun scanners, made everybody go through a scanner, make sure no weapons got into CPAC, but they want to make schools not a gun-free zone. The logic behind their own immorality to me and hanging on to the Second Amendment, no one's saying the right to bear arms is being taken away. Because frankly, considering the government that we have right now, I'm glad that there's a lot of people with weapons out there because that's why we want to keep them. You know what I mean? But there is a certain level of reasonability when you can look at every single one of these mass shootings have been perpetrated by assault weapons, which really are meant to just shred people. They're not protective. I heard a Republican former senator talking on a radio show over the weekend saying, I used to believe in this because they only became legal in the 60s. They haven't been, when they got invented, they weren't available to everybody. But this whole conversation about what our legal rights are, frankly, we all fundamentally in the back of our heads know nothing's going to change. Congress is not going to change these rules. They're not going to change it because of money. But gun sailors get to make a lot of money.
Yeah, and they make a lot of money in the argument. They make a lot of money in the not changing, right? Because when they talk gun control, a lot of guns sell.
Exactly.
And it's this. So, in my perspective on is simply this: is that, and we totally agree that I'm actually happy some of my neighbors have the weapons they do. Not that they can deter a federal government, and they got tanks and drones and everything else. But it's the point that if our government believes in gun control, if they believe in nonviolence, then why aren't they the ones who go first? Why don't they lay down their weapons first? Like a lot of the people I know who are really big into the Second Amendment, they are that way because they don't feel safe. Now, I can be condescending.
Well, they don't feel safe from our government. Let's be clear.
Exactly.
They don't feel safe not from their neighbors. Their neighbors they trust.
Right. They want to be like the guy in, the church shooting in North or South Carolina, where the guy went in the church and the man went in his house. He heard the guns. He heard the gunfire. He grabbed his assault rifle and he went out there and he held that guy down. The guy jumped in his car, ran off, and he chased him and he shot him and killed him. So I'm not against my neighbors having assault rifles. What I want is I want a society where my neighbor doesn't feel they need one. And there's a very difference between a violent approach to gun control where you're forcing people to give up their guns and building a peaceful society where they feel they don't need them. And my example is, think about the fact that we've had non-lethal weapons that our police, our NSA, our Homeland Security, they could have had these 20 years ago. When our government becomes an example of what they want in the people, when they stop selling these assault rifles to children all over Africa and the Middle East and destabilizing countries, when they are not the most violent people on the planet and they show that they have interest in building a peaceful world and society, then I'll start listening to them. But until then, I think it's a crazy concept to go to the most violent people the history of this planet has ever seen and expect that they actually will care about building a peaceful society. In the future, I mean, me personally, Lonnie, I don't believe in guns. I don't believe in technology to murder human beings, because that is something I think we should have evolved out of a long time ago. However, a lot of people are scared. A lot of people are concerned. And the easiest way to get us to a point where people don't feel they need weapons, because every generation will buy less and less and less and less and less if they feel they don't need it. We can get to no guns all over the world, and certainly in our country, if we stop building a violence-based society, which these people legislated, but we got to hold them accountable. And so this is the same discussion. It starts at the community level. When people are organized and they agree that we should be building a society where you don't have children who pick up arms, where you don't have children who feel they need arms, where you don't have a war on drugs, which is why 90% of the weapons in the black market in America are on the street anyway, all of this goes away. If our government was serious about gun control, they would end the war on drugs and 90% of the weapons would disappear. But as my friend Ty, I have to quote my friend Ty, what my friend Ty says though, but they don't care. They don't care how you die. They poison your water. They put GMOs in your food. Much. Pesticide. They go unregulated, untested vaccines. They don't care how you die. And so the concept of going to someone who doesn't care how you die and trying to get them to care how you die is insanity. And this is why I don't take a side in that debate on gun control. I think we can get there, but we got to stop forcing people and start looking at why they feel they need those things.
Well, it's that same conversation at the bigger level of the industrial military complex, the coup that happened after World War II. Essentially, Eisenhower wasn't warning us what will happen. He warned us of what did happen. Yeah. He was telling us what had happened, because since World War II, they infiltrated the military with Nazis, essentially. The scientists, all the Nazi scientists came over, and they developed these super secret Manhattan Project, which many Americans today are still suffering from. Hanford, St. Louis, Niagara Falls. There's a countless few cities throughout the country where the Manhattan Project secrecy still runs their lives and is destroying their lives. So it's that same secrecy of, we have a secret government. We have a president where we acknowledge the president. There's 18 levels above the president that he has no ability to find out from, the CIA, with an unlimited budget and an unaccountable activities. So we have a secret government using our tax dollars. Now, let our senators and our congressmen attempt to plug that hole up and say, wait a minute, we're going to draw a line in the sand, Mr. CIA. We're going to find out exactly where you're spending money, Mr. Military. No more. We got it that you can't balance your budget, but from this day forward, we're going to balance. How many of those senators would have accidents? How many of them would end up dead? And is that a free society? Is that like, this is where you and I think we agree that we're sort of living in this bubble of pretending that we have liberty, that the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is actually in our, as long as we keep our traps shut, we can have the ambiance of liberty and freedom. We can turn on the television without disconnecting the horror that, with disconnecting the horror that, in order for us to have all these luxuries in our lives, we actually need that military to go out and oppress.
You said it. You said it. In order for, and this is a huge critique I have, in order for me to live good, I got to have this cell phone, right? And I got to upgrade it all the time. I ignore the fact that it's based in slave labor.
Exactly.
I back in the past, and I say slavery was a bad thing, but I'm not reducing how many cell phones I buy. I'm not reducing my small electronics. And at the government level, like you said, that has become the job of the president and Congress, is get money for your party. And so you vote and do whatever the corporations tell you to do to get money for your party, and you ignore the consequences. And so the job of the president really isn't running the world anymore, or the country. I think they make some decisions that actually amount to something, but I think the vast majority of the time they get there and they're doing a job for corporations. They're putting together speeches for that, or the speeches are written for them. And there are so many, there are at least a dozen that we know of secret levels above that. How in the world, somebody explain to me, how in the world does a person run something and they're not even allowed to know the data of what they're running? How does it make any logical sense anywhere? And this is where the common ground is. And this is why I do my best, and I think a lot of my friends, they get me. What is the point of fighting about gun control? What is the point of
this book?
Healthcare? Mm-hmm.
Have you read this book?
Thank you. Yes.
Confessions, the new Confessions of the Economic Hitman by John Perkins. Everybody really needs to read it to understand. And he's hopeful. At the end of his book, I'm about a third of the way through this book. He's hopeful. At the end of the book, I peeked. He's like, there are things that we can do. We can take it back, but we first need to acknowledge how it's run. We need to acknowledge it in order for us to be able to undermine it, essentially. Because really, we have been running on a lot of false premises, and that's kind of the shock. I think that's a lot of the friction that people have. Like, in this conversation, we have, in the last 40 minutes or so, we've gone through a circle of like community rights, how the lack of that, the gun rights, our fundamental ideas of freedom. But it really comes down to, and the nuclear pollution, we're having this serious this generation is having this serious come to Jesus moment about, we have been super screwed. We have really been lied to, and the cleverness of it all. They have set up every block in our way so that we can't just clearly go out there, get our community rights, and say, hey, we're going to take it back. It's just not that simple. And frankly, it is off-putting. It makes people feel so overwhelmed that they just go, I just can't check out. I just can't do it. I just can't do it. I'm done. Or they get involved a little bit and they're like, I've done my duty. It's weary. It's a weary journey, right? So what we have to recall, though, is that this is the human journey. I mean, we are striving for betterness throughout all of it, right? And all of us, none of us wake up every day in any country that we're living in and say, oh, well, I've given up living. Everyone tries to do the best that they can do I'm like Chinese people. I had to interview some Chinese people in school for one of my classes because they had to go to our school to learn English, right? They actually feel sorry for Americans. They feel like Americans don't have a really good sense of freedom and equality in this country.
And we don't. And they're rightful to be sorry for us. We have foreigners who come here and they get here and they're like, whoa, I'm not staying here. This is crazy. You people have no freedom or rights. I'm going to work and do my job, send money back home. And once home is stable, I'm getting the hell out of here. And they fly right back out.
My daughter was a foreign exchange student, and she lived in Krasnodar in Russia, which is near St. Petersburg, right off the Baltic Sea. She was there for a year. When she came back, she literally cried. She was very upset. She's like, Mom, you don't understand. We think we're free. We're a lot freer in Russia.
Yeah.
That shocked me. That actually literally shocked me. But it's because we've regulated and we have taken it. It comes down to community rights. We don't have community rights.
We don't have community rights. I heard a good brother gave me a quote this week. I had to repeat a couple times. He said, our society began to fall apart somewhere around the time where we stopped putting porches on the front of our houses and we started putting patios on the back. And it was a really deep quote and statement. And the whole point was, when we stopped building communities, when grandma didn't sit on the front porch and, baby, get out my roses. What are you doing? You're supposed to get to school. When we stop working with each other, when we stop raising kids together, when we stop speaking to each other. I love going to El Dorado, Arkansas, where my mother's from. You sit on the porch, everybody talks. Everybody knows each other. So you're not scared of the guy up the street that has the assault rifle. And you're not scared of the person down the street that's living on. You're a community. And when you're a community and people are actually talking instead of these little automaton clone drones that work in cubicles and they pull their car in the garage, they don't talk to their neighbors, and they live in their little house, their little McMansion. When they're not a community and people don't talk, then the TV can divide you. The mainstream media and corporations owning it, you can get people to fight something that they're fear of, they have fear for, or something they don't know. And so putting the patios on the back and going into these recluse type corporate clone models, it destroyed the communities. And now you can't get people in the community talking because they don't even know each other. And half the time now they're scared of each other.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then you also get into this sort of elitism where people feel, and this I find is pervasive in American culture also. So we have a lot of obstacles because, you come into these sections of society where we're not harmonious. There's really no place for us to commingle and get past it, right? So, this is why I call it hate book. I actually I'm so over the whole Facebook thing right now. I think it's just a forum where people can just go and spew whatever hate they want, unfettered. And it's just, for me, the way that these mega social media, we found out in our country that Facebook and Twitter allowed foreign agents to come into our political system. That was discovered. Think of what they're doing in other countries. They're doing it in Australia. They have some legal action going in Australia. They have it going in France. They're going after democracy specifically to try to demean people from feeling the democratic spirit of asserting their rights, because we're headed into an age where people are going to need to stand in line and, because things are not going to get easier. The pollution is really actually way out of control.
It is.
And we have to put the brakes on this really, really fast.
Yeah.
It's not something that we'll be able to manage on our own without people deciding that they're going to get engaged.
Yeah.
And maybe that's where the benefit of Facebook is because at least people are engaging.
Well, the good thing, and I'd be honest with you, I love Facebook, so Mark Zuckerberg, don't shut me off again. I love Facebook, but the reason why is I'm working on building a community of my friends, and there are people who are very diverse from different communities, and we do crazy things, Lonnie. And you kind of see my page a little bit. We actually have intellectual discussions, and people agree to disagree. We don't do all the cussing and making things personal and flipping out and everybody's just sharing. We're going back to being adults and having adult-like conversation. And so it's not a hate book. Why
don't you tell people where to find it? We're coming on in less than a minute on the show left. Tell people how to find you on Facebook.
I'm your friend on Facebook. You can find me through Lonnie's, but I'm Gerard Kenyatte Hay on Facebook, and I'm on YouTube also. But, it's about having discussions like we used to. It's about, someone just posted in the room, it's about love. It's about refinding our love. When I believe when money got invented, I think human evolution began to slow down, and it eventually stopped when corporations pretty much took over the world. And the only way we get back there, outside of all these layers of politics and decisions and things we got to do,
is love. Put your courage feet on. Thanks, Gerard. I want you to finish that up. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.